name's Natalie. Today I'm finally gonna be doing my Booktube prize judging video. So I've tried to film this before and it is very difficult to get everything I've thought about these books in one video, but I'm gonna attempt it again. So I was one of the Booktube prize judges for the nonfiction group A that was part of the third round that has just finished at the end of May. So I had 6 books to read, as all of the judges do, and to rank them in the order from 6 being the lowest and 1 being my favorite book of the bunch. So I thought that I would share my thoughts about the books that I read from the nonfiction group A and my ranking and my reasons for ranking them the way that I did. The book that I placed in the 6th place was Maid by Stephanie Land. She is a single mother household and she's taking care of a very young child, her daughter. She's coming from an abusive relationship background and trying to get by with the meager income that she gets from cleaning as a maid. And so this book is partly talking about the work as a maid, the feeling of dehumanizing and degrading experiences that she feels as part of this work that she's doing, and the physical labor of it. She talks about poverty and homelessness and the feeling of, for example, being met with suspicion in trying to seek help from welfare and support, and having to justify your need for help, which is something that, again, I feel like is a really important part of the discussion of poverty and the mental and psychological experience of poverty. One of my criticisms isn't really a general criticism, it's maybe more to do with my preference and also the fact that I have to judge these books in comparison to each other. She's very specifically looking at her own life. I feel like it is an important experience and perspective to get in a book, but for me the book would have become more than her personal and individual experience if she could somehow have connected the personal to the systematic and structural problems that this is part of, because there's one of the books in the list do kind of this thing where they use their own personal experiences as a starting point to raise a more broad discussion that is the structure that creates this kind of issue. The other criticism is more a negative of the book, in my opinion, and that is she is quite angry or frustrated with certain things about her situation, which again is understandable, but the anger or the frustration is often directed towards people that have done nothing to deserve it. She seems to turn her anger and frustration towards her clients, the people that she's cleaning houses for. She makes the point of people judging her, but she continually judges other people, as I said, people she doesn't know. I would understand the feelings themselves, I just found that they were misguided or misdirected. So that was the main reason that this ended up being in the last place on my list. In the 5th place was The Ice at the End of the World by Jon Gertner. This is a book about Greenland. So he talks in the prologue and in the end, the epilogue, about his interest in Greenland as a location that has created a lot of scientific knowledge that informs our understanding of the climate change that we are seeing right now. But then the rest of the book is a mishmash of things. It's sort of a history of Greenland from various angles, partly talking about all of the American and Danish and Scandinavian and European explorers that had been doing trips and journeys over Greenland and sort of making paths of the place. And then a lot of the research that has been done on Greenland and the development of technology as well, because a lot of the time when they were trying to measure something on Greenland, they had no equipment beforehand, so they sort of had to create things alongside studying things. There were, I think, 3 things that I think were flaws in this book. First of all, the structure does not make it a very readable book in my opinion. I think it is too mishmashed with things. It's hard to get a sense of sort of an overview of this epic history and its various areas and subgenres within the book. Part of the problem I think I had with the delivery, I felt like the explorers' stories could have been much more narratively done, but it felt kind of dry in terms of the way that it was delivered. And then the third problem I had was probably the bigger problem I had, and that was that in terms of the knowledge of Greenland, in terms of the explorers, I feel like there was a lack of discussion of the colonialism, or at least the clashes between the Western explorers on the one hand and the Inuit tribes on Greenland on the other. There is some of the interaction between them that is so clearly uneven in the power dynamics, and that is really questionable. Like, for example, some of the Western explorers were buying all of these dog sleds, like the entirety of an Inuit's ownership of dogs, that they used as transportation everywhere, and that they were completely dependent on. They exchanged those with weapons, and for me the whole sort of the interaction between these two groups seemed very much in need of a critical discussion, and Gertner doesn't really touch on it at all. He just sort of lays the fact for you. And I guess this is sort of dependent on what you are expecting from a nonfiction author, whether you just want the objective facts or if you want an author that is more visible. Gertner is completely invisible in this book, and for me that was one of its limitations. The fourth book on my list is The Yellow House by Sarah H. Broom. Basically a memoir of the author growing up in New Orleans East, and about her upbringing and about her connection with this specific location. But it is also kind of a family history. She goes into her family history and her heritage. The way that she talks about place, the way that she talks about the significance of a physical location, of a place, of a home, and the connection of that to identity and to the way that we interact with the world, to the way that we relate to the world as well, because she is constantly thinking of herself as the yellow house, or the way that she is connected with it. So a lot of this book is her exploring what the New Orleans East specifically means to her, the yellow house means to her, New Orleans in general as well, and the way that it has been portrayed by other people, by media, by history, the kind of history that it contains. But as I said, it is also talking about her family connections and her human connections between sort of the network of people in her life. Even though I can understand from a thematic point of view why she wanted to go back into time and talk about her grandmother story, and then her mother's story, and then herself in a chronological order, I feel like it doesn't really help the reader, because you have no knowledge of her as an individual yet, so it's harder to understand the voice that is guiding you through these stories until you actually get to her story, and that is my favorite part of the book. In general, she has sort of a stream of consciousness style that does shift a lot between talking about place, talking about herself, talking about politics, about media, about various things in her life, and I feel like it was hard for me to place myself in the narrative, which isn't necessarily an issue in terms of the book itself, but for me as a reading experience it was a lot of work. But there were still a lot of parts of this that I liked, and especially her growing up as a young child, and just some of the things that stood out to me was when she talks about her vision becoming bad and how she deals with that. There are a lot of other things as well, like when she's older and she is becoming a journalist and writer and trying to figure out how she relates to her home after she's moved away. There were so many things that were thought-provoking and thoughtful, but the structure of the book as a whole I found made it harder to get invested in her story before quite a big part of the book had already passed. That is the reason it was my 4th book in the ranking. Then the 3rd book in my ranking was Know My Name by Jon Miller. So this is the one that I talked about in regard to Maid, where a personal story can be used to bounce off into a broader discussion. So Jon Miller in Know My Name talks about the experience of sexual assault and the way that that changed her life in so many ways, but she talks about the event itself, being sexually assaulted after having been in a party and waking up in a hospital not knowing anything about why she was there or what had happened, and dealing with the consequences and the aftermath. Specifically, she talks both about the event itself, piecing together that night based on the information from other people as well, and witnesses, and in her own memory. It also talks about the aftermath in terms of the emotional and mental experience, trying to deal with that experience and trying to look beyond it. And another part of the book, and a big part of the book, is the judicial process of her deciding to fight her case. Jon Miller talks about a really personal story, and she goes into all of the challenges that she has faced, but also she talks about the judicial process as a whole, and these kinds of crimes, how they are dealt with, what kind of experience a victim has, how victims are often re-victimized through the justice system. So there's so much valuable information and so much heartfelt storytelling in this book that I think this is the perfect blend of personal and a broader, more general discussion about the issues that we have with sexual assault, sexual violence as a whole, sexual abuse, and the problems with the justice system in dealing with these kinds of crimes and these kinds of victims of crimes as well. So I feel like this is just a really fantastic, strong memoir that I really appreciated and felt like I learned from her personal story, but also that I was really engaged with the more structural aspects of the story. So this was my this was the book that I placed in 3rd place. I don't really have any criticism against this book. I thought it was fantastic and would recommend it. The book that I placed in 2nd place is Say Nothing by Radden, Keefe. And this is an epic history of the IRA in Ireland. So this is talking about the Troubles and violence that happened in the 60s, 70s, 80s, up until the 90s, because of the clashes between the Irish and the English, where the IRA was a group of, if you call them terrorists or political activists, they were really violent either way, and used bombs and various other things to get their message across and to provoke change. And so this book is a history of Ireland during this time period, and of the many people in the IRA and their histories and their stories, and all of the people involved in one way or another with the IRA. So it's sort of, that is why I'm calling it an epic thing, because there's so many people involved in this, and there's so many players involved, and so many sort of subplots in this history. But it's just amazing the way that he has put these things all together. The way he tells these stories in comparison to the Eyes of the End of the World, I think that this is much stronger in the narrative style, even though there's so many people involved, even though there's so much information in it. It feels like he creates this kaleidoscope of everything that is happening, and you are sort of both above everything that's going on and looking down and seeing sort of the playing field and the people involved, and getting an overview, but also you're sort of in the midst of everything, and it feels immediate as well. So the way that Keefe does this book is fantastic. I can't wait to have a physical copy of my own to add to my shelves and to be able to read through very carefully. I listened to the audiobook, which is also fantastic and narrated with an Irish narrator, which definitely added to the tone of this book. But it's just a fantastic and really impressive work of nonfiction in terms of the research and preparation that must have gone into making this happen. And it's also sort of unique in what it's doing, which feels like something that is in itself a really relevant thing to make this in my top list. And then my favorite book of the bunch was Invisible Women by Criado Perez. So this is a book talking about gender and sex discrimination in society. It talks about this kind of discrimination in various aspects of social life, of medicine, of research, of transportation, of security and safety measures. She goes into examples of how this is happening. She gives examples from all over the world and from all kinds of women as well. A big theme in the book in general is unpaid work that women do, and the way that they become invisible by all of the things that they do that is not translated into money as clearly as men. So for example, taking care of kids, taking care of elderly, doing housework, things that are important aspects of everyday life, but that are not necessarily treated as valuable work. He talks about everything, as I said, from health to work to school and education, to the way that scientific research is being done and is being is strengthening these kind of biases by informing the various sectors of life through the male default. It both illuminates a lot of areas of life that, as I said, we might not even consider being issues, that we have just sort of accepted as fact. But of course, in order for us to want a change, we first must realize that something is wrong, and to realize that it is possible to change it. And I feel like Perez has done something incredible with this book. Just gathers so much valuable information into one book, and I feel like she does it with an accessible tone, both giving you the information but also sort of telling you what this means. Even though she is sort of heavy-handed sometimes with the point of the book and her thesis that she comes back to again and again, that this is the invisibility of women, and this is why we have a data gender bias. It makes it very clear throughout the book. It sort of comes back to the red thread of this is something that we actually can change, and if we have the information and we apply it, then a lot of these issues that are being brought about because of this discrimination we would not have to face. So those are all of the books that I read for the nonfiction group A and for the Booktube prize judging that I did. I found the judging process itself quite challenging because comparing very different nonfiction books is difficult. But I tried to just sort of compare them in terms of the delivery, execution, and readability. And this is the ranking that I came up with. So if you were one of the judges for this round, I would love to hear how you, or even in previous rounds, I would love to know how you went about with your judging process. If you've read any of these books, I would love to know your thoughts about them. So I hope that you are having a good day and that you are taking care of yourselves, and I will talk to you soon.